interest in the medical practice. Okay, we are ready, but we are waiting for participants to come and join us. Hi everybody, we are so happy to welcome you to the conference Health Before Profit, an international experience. This event is the last part of workshop that we organize every year about conflict of interest in medical practice. This year is been the 12th edition. I'm Anna Manoncini and the national coordinator of the project, and with me Giuseppe Quaranta and Teodoro Cazzarolli, facilitators of the workshop. It's my pleasure to introduce you to tonight's guests, Ellie White from Health Action International, okay, and Alice Fabbri, Research Fellow at the University of Bath. They'll share with us their experience in the field. Thank you everybody for being here with us tonight, and in the YouTube video description you will find the link to ask questions to the speakers, and then we will report to them. Let's start with Ellie's presentation.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I've been told that I'm the first non-Italian guest speaker as part of this workshop, so I'm very touched to be the first. I tend to speak quite quickly when I'm a little nervous or speaking publicly, and I appreciate that might be quite difficult if you are used to talking about these issues in Italian. So please do just comment if I'm speaking too fast and I will slow down. I just have a question, sorry, for the organizers. Do I change the slides myself or do I need to ask for that? Just realized I can't change it. Don't worry, I'll start. So just for a brief introduction, I work at an organization called Health Action International, which is an NGO based in the Netherlands, and we conduct research and advocacy to advance policies that enable access to medicines and rational use of medicines for people all over the world. As you would expect, we accept no funding from pharma, and all staff complete a declaration of interest when they join the team. We work on a variety of areas: access to insulin, snakebite treatment and prevention, price availability and affordability, access to controlled medicines, and some ad hoc consultancy work all across the globe. And I work in a team which works solely in Europe, and we work on medicines issues in the EU, advocating at the European Parliament, at the Commission level, as well as in member states, including the Netherlands, where we are based. And our work covers three main pillars: access to needed medicines, rational use, and democratization of medicines policy. And it's under the rational use area of our work that pharmaceutical promotion and conflict of interest comes in. 1 second. Is this a new slide for you?
Yes, these.
Yeah, okay, great. Sorry about that. So I wanted to start by going over the situation that we find ourselves in with pharmaceutical promotion. We at HI have become increasingly concerned at the impact pharmaceutical marketing has on rational use of medicines. And we know that pharmaceutical companies are spending billions marketing their products to healthcare professionals every year. You can see here on the right in this graphic that marketing is becoming a huge part of pharma companies' business models and plans, although the caveat with this graphic is that these figures are provided by those companies themselves. But we're seeing that marketing is getting more and more insidious and sophisticated, often tailored to make it as useful as possible for healthcare professionals, and often appearing in the form of unconscious bias or conflicts of interest that are simply declared and not tackled. We also know that social and digital marketing is increasing as a proportion of marketing budgets, which makes it really difficult to tackle, because a post that might be allowed in the US on Instagram, for example, is seen by users in Europe. Finally, we know that a majority of healthcare students feel their medical curricula underprepare them for this situation. And what does this mean? Well, what it means is that a huge amount of money is being exchanged, and for a really negative outcome, in that it's not benefiting patients in the slightest. I've included here a graphic from Euros for Docs, which is a recently created organization which brings together data on the amount of money that doctors have declared that they've received from pharmaceutical companies. And you can see the huge amount of money that we're talking about here, just in Europe alone. And all this isn't going to the benefit of patients. Evidence shows that exposure to information from pharmaceutical companies does not lead to net improvements in prescribing, but it can in fact negatively affect prescribing and professional behavior. There are other negative impacts too on the health outcomes of individual patients, thinking about whether they're actually prescribed something that has added therapeutic value, for example. And there's an impact on patient trust in healthcare professionals as independent and evidence-based experts who protect their best interests. Then we have the impact on the health of the population in general. Irrational use of medicine isn't just bad for patients, but for healthcare systems that are becoming too expensive and unwieldy, as well as for global health, given the impact of, for example, unnecessary use of antibiotics. So what does my organisation do about it? Well, we looked at the data behind the issues in pharmaceutical promotion, and one stat particularly stood out to us, which was that 85% of medical students surveyed in France reported feeling inadequately educated about conflicts of interest arising from interactions with the pharmaceutical industry. This made us think, are medical curricula actually providing these students with the tools they need to go out into their professional lives and be able to assess pharmaceutical promotion as they come across it? And what we discovered was that there's a real gap in medical curricula, and we thought that one of the best ways that we could do that would be to solve this problem would be to create a variety of tools, which I'll go through later. Beyond that, we lobby national and regional governments to enact and enforce laws that increase transparency in medicines policy and to tackle pharmaceutical promotion. For example, taking part in a British medical journal call out on transparency and conflict of interest. We also scrutinise involvement of pharmaceutical companies in policy making. For example, we pointed out here that there was a representative on a key health committee in the Netherlands who was under the influence of, who was actually funded by a pharmaceutical company. So we highlighted that issue. And we do a lot of work with organisations like UAEM, Universities Allied for Essential Medicines, FormInDep, No Free Lunch, who are undertaking key campaigns and projects at a country level. And how about you? Well, what we would suggest as HI would be that the best thing that you can do to take action is to inform yourself and inform your peers. And the key thing I want you to take away from this talk is that you're both a target of and a tool for pharmaceutical promotion. What I mean by that is that you're a target because pharmaceutical promotion methods are tailored specifically to target you and exploit the key characteristics of healthcare workers, whether that's a pharmacist or a surgeon or a research professional. They understand very carefully how you approach your days and how the issues that you face. So, for example, they're aware that that healthcare workers are increasingly time poor, and so they provide evidence-based information about their products that is quick to digest, so that healthcare professionals can pick it up and immediately prescribe it. We also have seen that they're aware that healthcare professionals want to put patient interests first, so they advertise the benefits to patients. And we're also seeing social and digital marketing tailoring itself directly to healthcare professionals, even getting inside specific forums for those professionals. So that's how you're a target. And you're also a tool, because a couple of the other main methods that pharmaceutical companies use within their marketing approach are relationship-based selling and use of key opinion leaders. So I'll talk about those a little bit more, but these are ways that pharmaceutical companies actually will use healthcare professionals as marketing tools, and they develop these long-term relationships. And all this begins a lot earlier than you would think. It's definitely, certainly, during your training, that you begin to be influenced by pharmaceutical companies. So, for example, there was a survey in 2010, which is a little bit old now, of students at a medical school in Germany, and they found that the proportion of students with direct contact with pharmaceutical sales reps increased from 21% in the first clinical year to 77% in the final year. So you can really see that increase during your studies. And this makes it even more concerning that so many students feel inadequately prepared to handle these promotional materials. And that's why we focus so much on upskilling medical students, because, as I've said, you're the main targets of this promotion and one of the key tools. So you need to be hyper vigilant towards conflict of interest and even the most subconscious bias. So as I said, I wanted to just go through these couple of places that are really where High feels it's most important for you to be aware of conflicts of interest, and places where you can be really scrutinizing what's going on as you're going through your training. So the first of those is relationship-based selling, which is, as you can imagine, the development of a relationship between a healthcare professional and a pharmaceutical salesperson. So this isn't just lavish dinners and things, but much more subtle relationship building, even just emailing over information on a product that actually might be useful. Any relationship with a pharmaceutical company can have an impact. And in fact, studies have shown how little contact is actually needed with students to impact their behavior. A US study of 280,000 doctors found an association between accepting even just one sponsored meal and higher prescribing of that sponsor's medicines, with additional or costlier meals being associated with even higher prescribing. And then there's the use of key opinion leaders as puppet or intermediary salespeople. So this is when they enlist a quite senior person within a medical faculty, or perhaps they maintain a relationship with a student all the way through their career. And then this highly respected academic or professional or researcher or director of a residency program receives some sort of agreed benefit or return for their services. So that could be travel and accommodation for a conference. It could be public profile. It could even be a commercial financial agreement where they are recruited and trained and paid to encourage their peers to use a certain product. And again, this is much more common than you might think. And another survey, again, in 2004, and I think it's quite interesting how the data is aging and whether that's a coincidence or there's been a lack of interest in this issue. But this survey discovered that 60% of department chairs in the 125 medical schools it surveyed had some sort of relationship with a pharmaceutical company. They might be a paid speaker, they might be a member of the board of directors, that kind of thing. So a lot more common than you might think. One of the other things that is really key to remember is that many healthcare professionals sincerely believe they're unaffected by pharmaceutical company influence. There's a number of studies that show that although they are actually under that influence, they believe they're not affected by it. And in fact, they believe that their colleagues are, which is a really common human trait. And I think it's something you need to watch for in yourselves. I wonder how many of you, while I've been speaking, thought to yourselves, I haven't been influenced yet. We don't know whether you have or you haven't, but it's a key danger posed by pharmaceutical marketing, that those affected don't believe that they're behaving in a biased way. They might think they're genuinely doing the best for their patients, and they can continue to work whilst technically experiencing a conflict of interest that should be reported. What High aims to do is to increase the number of healthcare professionals who really understand the extent to which exposure to pharmaceutical promotion can compromise the integrity of their clinical decision-making. And that is because we hope that then more of them would dissociate themselves from those situations I've described, which open themselves up to secondary influences. In addition to those, the relationship-based selling and the key opinion leaders, pharmaceutical companies can also directly influence medical schools in a variety of ways, and we've seen this in a number of different countries. And this is an area you can be really active in. You can be scrutinizing the materials you're studying, questioning choices about what's on the curricula, looking into the background of perhaps your the people who organize the residency program as well, so you can work out whether there are any conflicts of interest there behind the scenes. So I'll just briefly explain a few of these. I don't think any of them will be a surprise, but many medical schools and programs, for example, accept funding from pharmaceutical companies. There are studies that show support for residency programs in the US from pharmaceutical companies comes in the form of food for conferences, drug samples, unrestricted educational funds, direct contact with residents, that kind of thing. And the same study interestingly showed the majority of the directors of those programs disagreed with pharmaceutical company support. So one avenue worth exploring for advocacy is thinking about whether we can come to a place where the influence of pharma companies isn't as necessary because the funding for medical schools is much more safeguarded. And so therefore, directors wouldn't have to put their ethics on the line in order to train future medical professionals. Then we have writing and donating textbooks, which is a really striking example of pharmaceutical company interest. We see them actually writing these textbooks and then donating them, giving them the impression that they're an unbiased medical resource. For example, one book used widely in Canada, The First Principles of Gastroenterology, is actually published by AstraZeneca. So donating a textbook is tacitly funding a program because it's making it possible and also posing this conflict of interest. But then, if you add on the extra layer where it's written and published by that pharmaceutical company, we really need to be getting healthcare professionals and students to be being aware of the materials that they're being told to read, and checking out whether that's actually a pharmaceutical industry product. And often the funding isn't disclosed, and it's this lack of transparency that's really crucial, because even though a really conscious medical student might be aware of this, it's very hard to go back through the kind of paper trail and work out who's actually paid for certain books to be written. And pharma companies are betting that students don't have time amongst their studies and their clinical practice to actually research the background and conflict of interests of all their authors, which I'm sure you would agree with. But it's certainly a way that you can be really active in ensuring that you're not being tacitly biased by the pharmaceutical industry. Really unsettlingly as well, we've seen evidence of ghostwriting, with medical experts invited to speak at medical conferences and being given ghostwritten papers to present. And all this writing up of favourable articles to market a drug really means that that is leapfrogging the effective research into a drug's efficacy, and it means that we shouldn't that the added therapeutic value and the price point of drugs is actually quite questionable, because if we don't have rigorous peer review processes, and if we're finding too many ghostwritten papers in favor of a certain drug when the real written paper was a negative, then we're actually really undermining clinical practice and patient safety. And then one of the less obvious and more understandable ways that pharmaceutical companies influence medical training is through research funding. Evidence shows that pharma companies are more likely to prioritize lines of inquiry that focus on products and activities that can be commercialized, very unsurprising. But actually that same evidence shows that researchers are quite generally aware of the risk of conflict of interest. So this is just something to bear in mind if you do choose to move into research, to make that choice consciously and be aware of what you're getting into. So, as I said, one of the best ways that current and future physicians and healthcare workers can take action against conflict of interest is to be aware of the impact of pharma marketing and to remember that no one is immune. And that's why our work so far has heavily focused on preparing current and future medical and healthcare professionals. We hope that by giving medical students these tools to critically evaluate pharma company information and to assess each treatment option thoroughly and objectively, we're supporting ethical clinical practice and patient, not pharmaceutical-led healthcare. And to do this, we've produced a variety of tools that can be used either with HI or separately yourself, which go into the impact of pharmaceutical marketing and the strategies that they use, and the strategies to find independent sources of information as well. So I'll just run through them quite quickly. We have a couple of guides. The fact or fiction guide on the left there focuses mainly on pharmaceutical promotion in the EU, and it's a really comprehensive booklet that teaches students to identify and assess methods used in pharma promo activities, and develop the ability to critically appraise pharmaceutical promotion activities as well. And on the right, we have a guide that HI wrote in 2010 with the World Health Organization, which is absolutely huge, but it tells you everything you need to know about pharmaceutical marketing and is actually widely used around the world by medicine's faculties and as a public, as a companion to the WHO's Guide to Good Prescribing. So you should check that out. Then we have other resources that are a bit more interactive. So we have a test, like a quiz, both in English and in French, which asks questions about pharma promo to kind of complement the fact or fiction guide. So you can read the guide and then it's a fun little quiz that you can do to see whether you've picked up everything. We've also done a number of workshops in person before Corona and digitally since then, which are free workshops based on the guides for healthcare students, but also civil society representatives and policymakers as well. And then we have a whole bunch of webinars that we've been running for the last few years. Here are a few of them. So we have at the top left there, Paul Sheffer from Form in Depth speaking about the No Free Lunch Network, which is a really great group of chapters of people and medical students campaigning for greater transparency and in conflicts of interest. We had a webinar that we did ourselves on digital marketing because that's a really developing area for pharmaceutical promotion. And most recently, we had a webinar in June which featured the founder of Euro for Docs, and I included a slide from that website in one of my slides earlier. And it's a really interesting tool. You can go on there and you can type in the name of a physician and work out how much money they've had from pharmaceutical companies, or you can compare different countries within the EU and see how many declarations there have been, and then that's a really good way to interpret whether rules around declaring conflicts of interest are actually being followed. So I highly recommend that you dig into that as well. So just to sum up what you can do right now, you can use our materials to inform yourself and you can share them with a friend or a peer. You can scrutinize the practices of your medical school in particular. You can get involved in an organization that's advocating for change. And then number 4 is a bit of a push for becoming a high member. So you can become a member of my organization and get updates on everything to do with access to medicines and including pharmaceutical promotion as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ellie, for your presentation, your work, and these interesting tools. And now it's up to Ellie.
Thank you, Anna. I'll try to... Can you see my slides? I've had some technical difficulties earlier, so I'm not sure they will work out. You can see them?
Yes.
Okay. How do I move to full screen and move them? Ellie, what did you do when you weren't able to move them earlier? Can you tell me?
Yeah, so open your PowerPoint window.
Okay.
It feels like it will go wrong. Yeah, and then this, and then you
now moving. Great, thank you so much. Okay, I can't see any of you. I can only see the screen, but shout out if there is any problem. So first of all, thank you for the invitation to SISM. I have to admit that I remember attending the very first workshop on conflict of interest that SISM organized more than 10 years ago in Genova in 2010. And it's really nice to see that SISM is continuing to work in this area and that you guys arrived to the 12th edition of this conflict of interest workshop. So well done. So as Anna said, my name is Alice. I'm a medical doctor from Italy, and I'm currently working as a postdoc at the University of Bath. And I also would like to disclose that I have no pharmaceutical or medical device industry funding. So I hope that the workshop that you have attended over the last few days and also the presentation you have just heard from Ellie has helped you to familiarize with the issue of conflict of interest, and you're now more familiar with the evidence that really shows how financial relationship with the pharmaceutical manufacturers can really influence medical education, scientific research, clinical practice, and also the quality of patient care. And in this presentation, I would like to leave you with a bit of a more positive message, let's say, about the fundamental role that medical students can play in addressing all these problems that you have heard about. And before jumping into some examples of medical student activism in this area, I would like to maybe share my personal experience as a medical student, because I hope it might kind of resonate with some of you. So I was a fifth-year medical student when I attended an elective seminar at my university in Italy about conflict of interest in the medical profession. It was a seminar in the evening, just an elective seminar, not compulsory, and I decided to go. And the speaker described several examples of the strategies that pharmaceutical companies use to influence scientific research, professional practice. It was just a 2-hour event, but for me, it was really a turning point, because no one until that moment had ever told me anything about these issues during my medical training. So the following day, I went back to the hospital for my clinical rotation, and I really started noticing the pervasive presence of pharmaceutical companies in the everyday life of health professionals, from the contacts with sales representatives to the sponsored educational materials, to the pens, notebooks, and other gifts that find their way into the doctor's office. And until that moment, all those practices were completely normal to me. I had accepted those pens myself, and I had even felt honored that the drug reps were giving me their attention, because during my medical training, no one had ever told me to question these things or warned me about the potential influence that this type of interaction could have on my behavior. But after that seminar, that was for me really like a turning point, and I decided to start working with some researchers in Bologna and medical students to raise awareness of these issues within our university. So the first thing that we decided to do was to do a survey to kind of map the situation. So we launched this survey in Bologna in 2008. We surveyed 190 medical students to really try to understand the medical students' knowledge and attitudes towards the pharmaceutical industry. And the results were really aligned with what Ellie has just pointed out. So our study revealed a lack of information, a lack of knowledge among students about these topics. And also most students also reported not feeling adequately trained on conflict of interest and requested more educational opportunities on these topics. So we decided to use these results to organize some awareness-raising activities in Bologna. So we organized a series of conferences on conflict of interest, an elective course completely dedicated to conflict of interest. But we also realized that our activities at the local level were important, but we also needed to act more at the national level. And this became possible when our team in Bologna met SISM. So we started a really fruitful collaboration with the NPO at the time and then in the following years. And the activities that we worked on together were really focused on these three main issues. First of all, training opportunities for students. So as I said, the first workshop in Genova in 2010. And what was interesting was also that the students who attended that workshops, when they went back to their local university, decided sometimes to organize also events at the local level to raise awareness among their colleagues about the topics that they had heard about during the national workshop. So it was really a virtuous circle. And then SISM also focused on research, so they decided to replicate, for example, the survey that we had done in Bologna in 2008 in 3 other universities, Bari, Foggia, and Varese in 2014. And then there was also the advocacy arm, so advocacy activities aimed at academic and non-academic institutions. And I had the pleasure to collaborate with the SISM on some of these activities. But while organizing all these activities around conflict of interest in Italy, I also soon realized that we were not alone. And there are several groups of health professionals around the world that work on these topics. For example, No Grazie in Italy, No Gracias in Spain, Formindep in France, but also medical students association that are quite active on these topics. And for me, it was particularly interesting to learn about AMSA, the American Medical Students Association. So in 2007, AMSA decided to produce a scorecard that basically rates medical schools in the United States on their conflict of interest policies. So they downloaded all the policies from the websites of the universities and scored them according to 14 policy domains. For example, whether the university allows visits from drug representatives, whether they allow physicians to receive gifts or meals from industry, whether there is a formal curriculum on conflict of interest for medical students. And this is just a screenshot of a little part of the scorecard, which is much bigger than that. So each row is a different university, and then each column is one of the domains that they assessed. So as I said, gifts, meals, conflict of interest, curriculum, etc. And then they add up all these different scores on the 14 policy domain, and they score the university, the entire School of Medicine, on a scale from A to F, where F was the worst grade possible. And when AMSA started this assessment in 2007, actually several medical schools received the worst grade possible, an F, on their conflict of interest policy. But what was interesting is that this scorecard, the publication of this scorecard, generated quite extensive media attention. And so the media the noise and the media coverage is coupled with the advocacy activities organized by the students has then successfully prompted universities in the United States to either develop conflict of interest policies or strengthen the existing policies. So, and year by year, AMSA kept doing this assessment. And more schools basically moved to the highest grade possible and received a letter A or a letter B. So quite an interesting development. And just to give you an idea, so when I'm talking about conflict of interest policy, what could maybe a good conflict of interest policy include? I'll give you just two examples, one from University of British Columbia in Vancouver, and the other one from the Stanford School of Medicine. So let's have a look. For example, the Faculty of Medicine of the UBC in 2010 developed this policy that requires that before beginning a lecture, the speaker, the teacher, needs to provide a statement about their conflict of interest. For example, if today I'm coming to you and speaking about statins, I need to disclose in the classroom my ties with statins manufacturer. For example, do I receive honoraria from them? Am I a consultant from a statin manufacturer? Do I sit in their advisory board? So, and this disclosure is just intended to allow students to really decide for themselves whether the information they receive in the lecture is then unbiased and evidence-based. It's like you put an additional pair of glasses through which you read the information that are provided to you. Another example, it comes from the Stanford School of Medicine. So they've developed this policy that really prohibits physicians from accepting gifts of any size from industry, including drug samples. And they, among the provision of this policy, they also ban industry representatives from patient care area. And so the meetings with the drug reps can only happen by appointment. And these guys are really quite important and bold decisions from these academic institutions, because if you think about this, the views and the attitudes towards industry tend to form quite early in our career and are really shaped by the environment in which we are trained. In my example, I felt that all those practices were normal until someone told me that they were not. So if I had been trained in a school that prohibited certain behaviors since the beginning, I would have consider them not normal since the beginning, basically. And we also have some evidence. So in institutional policies, this is just to say, that a conflict of interest policy of a university can really influence how future doctors will interact with industry during their career. And we also have some evidence that suggests that conflict of interest policy may have the potential to impact clinical practice. So I've pasted here this study published in the British Medical Journal, where the authors basically studied the impact of attending a medical school that has a gift restriction policy, the impact this has on the adoption of new drugs when the doctors start working. So, for example, they looked at the physician's propensity to prescribe newly introduced and marketed psychotropic medications when there are already older medication effective in the same class. And they showed that for 2 out of the 3 drugs under examination, the odds of prescribing were reduced among physicians who graduated from a medical school that had a gift restriction policy. So we have some evidence that shows that conflict of interest policy may have the potential to impact clinical practice and, for example, reduce prescribing of newly marketed pharmaceuticals. Another interesting development of that AMSA scorecard that I described is that the scorecard resulted in similar analysis of institutional conflict of interest policies in other countries. So researchers or groups of medical students in Australia, in Canada, in France, in Germany, in Belgium have decided to replicate the scorecard produced by AMSA, and they've done their assessment of their own institutional policies. And these are some of the articles that stemmed from those projects. Another interesting thing that I would like to highlight is that students, as well as assessing their university's conflict of interest policies, some students' associations have also been at the forefront of developing policies for their own organization. And I'll give you two examples, one from Australia, the Australian Medical Students Associations, also called AMSA, and then SISM, the Italian Secretariat of Medical Students. So both the associations have really committed to not accepting sponsorship from pharmaceutical companies or entering into partnership agreement with these companies. And when I attended events and workshops organized by both these associations, I really had the opportunity to witness that it is possible to do things differently, to organize educational events without depending on pharmaceutical industry sponsorship. And I think this could really become an interesting model also for professional medical associations that instead often rely on industry funding for their conferences. One final positive example comes from the IFMSA, the International Federation of Medical Students Associations. So you're probably all familiar with it. So it's a network of students associations from all over the world. And during their annual meeting in Taiwan in 2019, they adopted this policy on integrity and transparency in medical education. And the policy contains a strong call to action for medical schools to implement conflict of interest policies, and also a call for national medical students organizations to refuse funding from the pharmaceutical industry. So I hope that these few examples gave you an idea that I think medical students' activism in this area is really a positive sign that this issue of conflict of interest is being taken seriously, and also a positive sign that there is hope for change, because when you work together, guys, collectively as medical students, you really have the power to generate change. So this is it for me. I'll stop sharing and come back to the meeting.
Thank you so much, Alice. And I'm a little bit moved by the final part. And we have a question for you. And now we are gonna ask you. So Teodoro and Giuseppe, it's up to you.
Yes, of course. I can start with a question, which is the first one, and it is for Alice, so we keep in your presentation. And I mean, for you, we would like to ask if in your career you had noticed some differences regarding the perception of conflict of interest in the medical practice among Italy and the United Kingdom. If so, how?
Thank you. I'm not sure I can comment on this because I've moved here just 1 year ago to the UK. So I've not lived here enough probably to really comment more in general. But what I can say is that I feel like, so when we started really talking about this issue in Italy, for example, in 2008, we found that it was really, really a thorny topic, and it was really difficult to even raise this issue. I feel like year by year, there is a bit more, at least, openness, or this is my feeling, or at least now that I'm abroad, I feel like these are more accepted topics, or there is a bit more of a community working on this, especially on commercial determinants of health. It's becoming a bit of a more popular, let's say, topic. So I hope that this is already a sign that at least we can speak about this issue without really immediately hurting people. Because what worries me is that, and maybe we also need to think about how we talk about this topic, because sometimes doctors really feel accused when you raise this issue. And that's not what we're talking about. We need to really, we're not talking about corruption or bad apples, rotten apples. When we talk about conflict of interest, we're really talking about a much more subtle situation and conditions that a lot of people are exposed to and don't even realize. So sometimes it's also about framing the issue in a way that doesn't make people immediately angry. I feel like this is an important thing to think about, how we frame the issue. But in general, I also found that medical students are much open to these topics compared to maybe older people. So I think also it's important to start talking about this as soon as possible in your medical career, so that when you are still you're not too much into the system, let's say. Not sure I've replied to your question. I've just talked about a lot of things, sorry.
No, that's completely fine. So making sure you know about it before your house is full of gadgets and your papers of research are a little bit biased.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Teodoro. I strongly agree with your answer. And I have now a question for Ellie. What's the most effective strategy to tackle down unethical behaviors and increase the knowledge of conflict of interest? Do you think that European policies or advocacy from below are most effective?
Thank you. So I think some of the most effective strategies I have seen are, well, I think the scorecards have been highly effective because they've taken information to each institution about how that specific institution can improve itself, and it takes away some of that work that the institution needs to do to think about it. But the other effective strategies have been the more kind of top-down national legislation. So, for example, in Spain, doctors are legally required to declare their interests, which means that there's almost 100% reporting rate, whereas in other European member states there isn't that kind of rule. And so you see on the Euros for Doc dashboard quite clearly the countries where in Spain you've got the 100%, and then Italy is half that, because it's just not actually legislation or regulation, however it is introduced. So I think it's kind of a cop-out, but I think both are really important. You need to have that the top-down kind of compelling healthcare professionals to be honest about their conflicts of interest, but you also need the advocacy that brings that information to the people who can make those changes, and kind of gives that sense of urgency behind it, because it's all very well a policy person like me going to a decision maker and explaining why it's important. It's actually more valuable when I come with signatures or with a representative of a active body to make it clear that there's that public demand for such changes.
Thank you for the answer. And Teodoro, you can go now.
Oh, okay. Actually, this is a difficult question, and I've seen it in a pigeonhole, but I would like to expand the question, because I mean, talking about conflict of interest is difficult, and sometimes people who are not completely aware about it can confuse you for a conspiracy theorist or like some extremist, and when actually you're just saying what's in the deontology code, or actually you're following the ethical behavior which we are supposed to which is supposed to guide your clinical behavior. So my question is like this question is about like how to talk about conflict of interest in the medical practice or in any practice without making use like without people doubting about what you are saying, with people actually listening to you. So this question is not related to anyone specific, so you can both answer. But I mean, it's very difficult, and it always comes up.
Would you like to go, Ellie, or shall I?
No, you go first.
what I try to say is that I try also to have evidence-based conversation. So trying to say that, of course, there is a risk that, I mean, if you think about this, corporations really influence all our lives. I mean, from the product that they provide to us, the information they give to us, the services that they provide to us. And I'm talking about corporations more in general. So I'm expanding the discourse also to tobacco, alcohol, food companies, oil companies. And the thing is that, yes, sometimes when you raise this issue, you're really questioning the entire system, and people can say, oh, you're just, these are just conspiracy theories. But what I tend to reply when this comes up is that actually we have a huge body of evidence that we can't ignore, that constantly, that keep showing when you do studies across different industry sectors, that industry just keeps using the same practices to advance their economic and political objectives. And we have proofs that this has consequences for the health of the population and for the health of the environment. So I always try to frame the discourse around the evidence, but there is, I agree, the risk that people will just see you as an anti-industry person. So sometimes also another strategy is also to recognize that what is true is that industry also can bring some benefit. This corporation brings some benefit to the society, and we can't ignore that. We all benefit for some of their products, but there is increasing evidence that their practices are also harmful. And so try to balance. There is some positive, of course, we recognize, but there is also so much evidence about the negative influence that some of their products have. Let's think about tobacco, for example, but also for products that are considered, they have a better consideration, like pharmaceutical companies, like drugs. We also have evidence of these companies using similar strategies to tobacco in terms of influencing scientific research, using marketing strategies. So I often say that it's basically one industry, one corporation that uses the same strategies, whether it's a pharmaceutical company or an alcohol company, even if the product can look very different. Ellie, not sure whether you want to add something.
No, I think that was a really well-rounded answer, and it relates to another question I saw pop up about are all interactions with pharmaceutical companies inherently dangerous? And I think we agree with you entirely that we can't pretend that pharmaceutical companies are evil, dangerous people, and that they don't do anything good for the world. What we do need to remember is that they do everything for profit. And so although there might be some really good outcomes and some new drugs that are very beneficial to people, we have to interpret how they speak to medical professionals as they're selling something. It's not out the goodness of their own heart that they want to invest in a conference, for example. It is to get their product at the top of the list. And that product might be the best one out there, but we have to take all the information that's there, take an evidence-based approach, and look and think really analytically about whether there's the added therapeutic value, for example. So yeah, it's definitely that kind of, it's towing the line, and there's certainly very good things coming out of pharma. We just have to be cautious and aware.
Thank you for your answers.
Thank you for the answers. I have a questions for both, and it's really related to us as medical students. And it says, how can we raise awareness in the academic institutions? Because as students, we are quite active, but it's very difficult to be heard. For example, the aforementioned policy statement by Alice, we have updated it this year, but it's difficult that policy will be read by anyone apart from us.
Well, I don't actually have any experience being a medical student, so I don't know the exact way, but I would, the way I would approach it would be to try and have face-to-face meetings, because they're so much more powerful than emails or letters even. So finding you don't have to go to the top first, but finding some professors and teachers who can be on side and having meetings with them and really kind of expressing your concerns and taking that evidence with you and those policies and trying to get them on side gradually is the most valuable way. That's how we approach it when we need to get something out of the European Commission, for example. We head for quite a junior civil servant, have a really good conversation with them, and then they put us in touch with their boss, and you have to work up the ladder, and you eventually then find you have enough momentum and enough people behind you and enough senior people behind you that change can be achieved. But and I think the other thing is to be patient and to be resilient, and to remember that these things do take a long time, and it's not that you're not failing because people aren't reading your policies. You're still doing great work, and it will come. It just takes a long time, and it's difficult to be mentally resilient when you're trying to advocate about something so important, but it's really valuable as well.
I completely agree with Ellie. Sometimes it's just really approaching open-minded people. You can approach, I don't know, you're a professor of public health or you're a professor of pharmacology, and try to find allies. And sometimes you just need one person sometimes to be your ally, and maybe to introduce this topic in the medical curriculum. This is what happened in some universities in Italy. We managed to create an alliance with one professor, and they gave us space during their course maybe to treat this issue, and became kind of a curriculum to introduce this topic in the official curriculum rather than an elective. Another issue, and I'm not sure whether it's AMSA or UAEM, University Alliance for Essential Medicine. Ellie, I'm not sure. I saw sometimes some certain point on one of these two websites, like really a toolkit of how to really advocate around this issue. So they already had letters that you could use to approach the dean on certain topics. I'm not sure which one of the two. I think I saw.
But it definitely exists, and there are templates out there, and other people in other countries who've done it already, who are you could approach as well.
Yeah, I think it could be really useful maybe to see what others have done or use some of their materials, and also always be in network with this and share experiences. I think of these medical student activists could be a good idea also. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your answer. The next question I would like to make you. Is there proof of biased behaviors in the acting of institutions? Are there national ministers of health affected too in their policy making?
Well, the example that comes to mind is the UK health minister who gave a multi-million-pound PPE contract to the former owner of his local pub, who had never worked in healthcare before. So, I mean, there's certainly, I wouldn't trust a single person in government to say that they're not biased in some way, and you should approach all policymakers as though they might have a conflict of interest and work through that. And yeah, so there's certainly conflicts of interest, and again, it's the kind of situation certainly in the UK where you just have to declare that conflict of interest, and it's as though your brain magically isn't biased by that relationship, even to the extent that you could be a minister of health and also be a board member on a company, probably not exactly a pharma company, but something close to it. So yeah, there's absolutely proof of bias amongst ministers of health in various places, and government ministers, and it's unfortunately that's the kind of thing where you need the public to call for that person's resignation or such. It's not really the kind of thing that you can kind of do as students, or maybe it could be, but and with institutions, I think something that Hi is very concerned about is that certain institutions like the European Medicines Agency, for example, has working groups. I actually sit on the Patients and Consumers Working Group for Hi, and there are organizations on there that have pharma funding, so they have a seat at the table when we discuss issues relevant to patients and consumers, and when we scrutinize EMA activity. And that's a really concerning trend, because that's giving a seat to the table to people who are biased by pharma, and again, just declaring conflict of interest and pretending that declarations are enough. So yeah, I don't know in particular of any examples of biased behavior from that, but there are people in the room who have biases. Yeah.
And just to reinforce what Ellie said, we have proofs of, for example, pharmaceutical companies spending huge amount of money in, for example, campaign contributions and lobbying. So there is this article that I recently read in JAMA Internal Medicine that I can share with you guys. So they analyzed how much money the pharmaceutical and health products industry spent on campaign contributions from, I think it was over a decade, 20 years, 1999 to 2018, at the federal and state level. And they've really, I don't remember the exact number, but they showed how they spent really millions of dollars on campaign contributions and lobbying. And often these contributions were targeted at senior legislators that were sitting on committees that were drafting healthcare bills, that were trying, for example, to develop policies around drug pricing and drug regulation. So these type of money were really trying to probably counteract the efforts of the government to decrease the costs of drugs. So we have proofs that they really invest a lot of money in trying to really shape policies.
Okay, I'll go with this one. So I don't know if I got the question right, but I will read it anyway. So, is there in Italy conflict of interest is socially okay? In Italy, conflict of interest seems socially accepted, and if you talk against people, they underestimate the problem. So, how can we change the social conception of COI?
I can't see Ellie. I think she's in backstage. Can we bring her back maybe?
Sorry, I clicked something.
Actually, I think that this question can be applied to any country.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because there certainly is a like a conflict of interest is becoming the norm in healthcare almost. It's modeled by key opinion leaders, it's modeled by senior people, and like you said, Alice, at the start, you joined a hospital and you didn't really even clock all the ways that you were being biased until you went to that evening lecture. So it would be difficult for you to have come in and said, why is there a Pfizer gift bag here? So it's difficult, and it also comes back to this question of seeming like you might be a super radical, or living in a bubble where you think that people can exist in a vacuum without any conflict of interest. But you just have to decide that this is something that you want to stick up for, and that this is something that you want to align your ethics around, and say that you don't want to kind of passively support conflict of interest by feeling uncomfortable about talking about it.
I think it's a great point, Ellie. And I think, yeah, as I said, we can change things, I think, training the future generations to consider these things not normal anymore. So this is why I really appreciate all the efforts that SISM is doing to really, and also HI are doing to really educate the future generation, because if we can start slowly denormalizing things and questioning things. And I know it's an uncomfortable position, but sometimes you might need to be the black sheep that will say no to something. So this is some of those groups that I showed is called no grazie, for example, or no gracias. So people that start saying some no's, and sometimes even saying a no in a group of people, they instead say yes, can make the others, okay, but why is the person saying no? And maybe start the conversation. So don't underestimate. This is what happened also to me in the beginning when I started raising this issue with my friends after hearing that 2-hour lecture, and people were saying, what is she talking about? Why is she suddenly questioning everything? But don't underestimate the power that this then some even informal conversation can have, because this is how things started for me, just informal conversation with the other medical students. And I realized, oh my God, no one is aware of this, so I need to do something. So we did the research, and then we started working with SISM, and then it was a snowball thing. And it was, for me, really an interesting experience to see how, from a small seed, sometimes you can get a big tree.
If I can say, it happens to everybody. It's the norm. You get blown up by this like knowledge, and you realize that the way you saw the world, at least in the health sector, is different. And I mean, it has had this effect to me too, and I guess to everybody.
Thanks, Teodoro. It's really good to hear that.
I don't know if there is time for the last question. Anna, is there time?
Yes.
Okay.
The last one, and then let's see.
I have a questions maybe for Ellie. Are there laws or national policies that can decrease the ghostwriting phenomena?
I don't know of any explicitly. You would hope that peer review processes would be able to uncover situations where the report has been written by someone other than the person submitting it for review. But I really don't know. That's a very good question, though, and it's would be complicated to enact. I think it needs to really be a change in how people are allow themselves to be approached by pharmaceutical companies, because I don't know that you could make a legal requirement that someone has to own up to who's written what, or I guess it could be fraud. It could be a type of fraud, so perhaps it would be feasible that way. I think the better way to approach it would be to be discouraging people from taking money from pharma in exchange for pretending to have written something. Would be the better approach.
Okay, this was the last question. So we would like to thank both Alice and Ellie White, and everybody that shared these 2 hours, 1 hour and a half with us. We are very, very happy. Thank you for all these ideas and for all these optimism for the future, because I think too that we can change things, and this is probably one of the events that really can have an impact on a lot of people. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.